In this video, we're going to take a look at how we can parse a CSV file using our knowledge of Python. In our previous data representations course, we learned how to read data from files and to work with strings. And so we really have everything that we need in order to be able to convert a CSV file into a Python tabular data structure. So let's take a look at how we could do that. In order to talk about how to parse a CSV file, we actually need a CSV file to parse. And so I have one here. I've called it hightemp.csv, and it's data on the average monthly high temperature for a variety of cities across the world. Now you can see that my table has 13 columns. The first column is the city name, and then the next 12 are the months from January through December. And then I have 10 rows of actual data from 10 different cities around the world. And now I have to apologize here, though, that the high temperature data is actually in Fahrenheit because I live in America. So I do apologize to those of you who live in other parts of the world where you use a more rational measure of temperature. Now you can also look at this file and see that there are no quote characters. All the fields are separated by commas, and there's no spaces between the commas and the data. So let's take a look at some Python code that we could use to parse this CSV file. You can see here that I have a function called parse that takes one input, CSV file name, and that is the name of the CSV file that we would like to parse. And we're going to open that file, read it, and parse it into a list of lists tabular structure. So you can see I start out by initializing a variable named table to an empty list. This is going to be my table. And then I open the CSV file for reading. And then I iterate over all of the lines of the CSV file. First thing I do is call rstrip to get rid of the trailing white space, in particular the new lines at the end of the line. And then I get all the columns by calling split. I have a comma separated file, so I want to split on a comma. And that gives me a list of all the columns. I'm just going to append that list to my table. And once I've gone through all of the rows, I'm done. I can just return the table. So that doesn't seem too difficult, right? All I had to do was open the file, read each line, and split those lines on the commas. And then I have a tabular structure that I can return. Now, next here I have a function that will print out a table nicely, and I'm going to use string formatting. We've learned about this in our data representations class, so I'm not going to go over it very carefully. But you can see that basically I iterate through the rows, and I print the header column left justified, the rest of the columns right justified, so everything should line up nicely. Finally here I call parse with my hightemp.csv file, and then I print the table out. So let's see what this looks like. And you can see I end up with a nicely formatted table here with the headers of city and all the months, and then 10 rows of the different cities with their average monthly high temperatures. And you can see that everything looks formatted all nicely, meaning that I did effectively parse this file into a list of list format. Now, let's try another CSV file. Let's parse a file called hightemp2.csv. And let's see what happens in this case. All right, it does not look as pretty. What's going on? Well, this file is not as nicely formatted as the other. If we flip over here and take a look at it, first off, I do have quoted fields. And my cities are more complicated now. Instead of just giving you the city name, I actually have the city and the country separated by commas. And this is a problem. This is valid CSV because it's in quotes, right? It shouldn't consider Houston and USA two different columns because the double quotes should allow me to put the comma inside of this particular column value. However, our code is not sophisticated enough to deal with this. Our code doesn't do anything with quotes. Also notice that there are spaces thrown about inside the file, which again is not illegal in the CSV format, but it is defeating my simple parser here, and I end up with a not very nicely formatted output and it does not recognize the first column. So I end up with data that has 14 columns in it instead of 13 because the commas that I was using in the city names to separate the city names from the countries are treated like a column separator. Hopefully you got the idea from this video that it's actually not too difficult to parse a very nicely formatted CSV file that doesn't have anything tricky in it. However, once the file gets a little bit more complicated, especially when I'm using quotes for their intended purpose to make sure that I can have separators inside of field values, things then start to get a little bit more tricky. Now you can start to imagine how I might write Python code to deal with all those situations, but do you really want to? I told you before that CSV is a widely used format for storing tabular data. There must be a better way here.